All right, history and geography of the Bible. We left off last time with the settlement of the land of Canaan in the book of Joshua. Of course, he took them in. He led the campaign to get rid of the major strongholds, and they divided up the land then and told the tribes individually to go into the various territories and to clean up, to clear out the rest of the pagans who were living there. And we want to note in Joshua 21, verses 43 to 45, how that there's a marker here about God fulfilling his promise. So if I could get somebody to read Joshua 21, 43 to 45. Go ahead, Charles.
Every one of these cities has
Joshua 21, 43 to 45.
43.
Yes, sir.
So the Lord gave to Israel all the land of which he had sworn to give to their fathers, and they took possession of it and dwelt in it. The Lord gave them rest all around, according to all that he had sworn to their fathers. And not a man of all their enemies stood against them. The Lord delivered all their enemies into their hand. Not a word failed of any good thing which the Lord had spoken to the house of Israel. All came to pass.
All right, and somebody remind us why this is significant. Why does noting he fulfilled it, Jim?
It's a land promise.
Okay, the land promise. And so what does that mean for today?
Well, a lot of people are still looking for Israel to become Israel. And everybody right here, we're here.
Right, exactly. Nancy, you have something to add?
Saying that people still think that promise is in effect today.
Right, that there's still this fulfillment that they're looking forward to in the future. It's all wrapped up in that doctrine of premillennialism. And here it nails down for us that God fulfilled his promise to give them the land. They've gone in now. They're possessing that land. That land is theirs. And so he kept his promise, and this is one of the reasons we can trust in God today to keep his promises, as we see how they were fulfilled in times past. And quite frankly, when you begin to think about some of these doctrines that men have invented, it undermines God's truthfulness and the fact that we can rely on him to keep his word. So here we see that he's kept his word. He has led them into that land. And just a reminder on this one here, the territories, as they go into these relative territories that are shown on the map, and the size of the men who are of military age, that's what that number is. So there's a greater number of people in the tribe when they're going in to settle it. For instance, Judah, 76,500. That's talking about the military age men. That's not talking about the women, the children, the older men, and all of that. And so this is the size, if you will, of the army that's going into this territory. When you look at these numbers, and if you study ancient warfare, you understand they had significant numbers to go to battle in the, confronting another army. They had pretty good numbers. You go back, you read Alexander the Great, or you read about Julius Caesar. There were times where they had 15, 20, 25, 30, 35,000 troops, and they did a lot of conquering, a lot of defeating of enemies. And so they have numbers on their side going in here, if you will. At least they have sufficient numbers to go in and to clean out those territories. So it's not a matter of lacking strength, the ability, the numbers, if you will, to take this land, to fully settle it. It is going to be something else that comes into play when you get into the book of Judges. So when we think about the book of Judges, remember that it is arranged thematically. If you try to read the book of Judges chronologically, sometimes it's going to get confusing because one of the descendants of, trying to remember his name, trying to remember this offhand, Phinehas, the son of Eleazar, is mentioned toward the end of the book, but he actually lived at the beginning of the time of the judges, not toward the end of the time of the judges. And so just keep in mind that it's more thematic in its arrangement, and it goes from a time when they were more faithful to a time when they were less faithful. And that makes sense, of course. And that's why it's arranged this way, to give us that sense of things declining and degrading over time during the time of the judges. Let's look real briefly here. Judges chapter 1, and note with me, and I'm just going to skim this here, but in Judges chapter 1, basically 1 down to 21, it gives us the southern tribes, Judah and Simeon and Benjamin, and some of their successes in clearing things out. But specifically with Benjamin, notice Judges 1 verse 21. Who will read that one for us? Judges 1:21. Go ahead, Tanner.
But the sons of Benjamin did not drive out the Jebusites who lived in Jerusalem. So the Jebusites have lived with the sons of Benjamin in Jerusalem to this day.
Okay, so you've got Judah having some success, Simeon has some success, but Benjamin didn't drive them out. So the people are remaining among them at this time, and we'll get to Judges 2 in just a minute, but they remained among them at this time in Jerusalem. And then you get down to the latter part of chapter 1, and it gives us there how that these northern tribes failed one after the other. So, for instance, if you look in verse 27, Manasseh did not drive out the inhabitants of Bethshean and its villages. And you drop down to verse 29, Ephraim did not drive out the Canaanites who dwelled in Gezer. Verse 30, nor did Zebulun, nor did Asher. Verse 31, 33, nor did Naphtali drive out. And so it tells us that these northern tribes were not diligent to get rid of the people who were living in that land at the time. And so it's going to end up being a problem, of course, and we're going to dig into that in just a minute. But if you will, let's notice in Judges 2 and verse 10. Judges 2 and verse 10. Who's got that for us? Go ahead, John.
And all the generations also were gathered to their fathers. And there arose another generation after them who did not know the Lord or were the work that he had done for Israel.
All right. Chapters 1 and 2 really are kind of a broad summary of this period. And here it's telling us how that things changed from that faithful generation with Joshua and the elders who outlived Joshua, and then this other generation that comes along and they don't know the Lord. And so they end up having a lot of problems, getting ensnared in idolatry because of the people around them that they did not drive out and destroy. Now, let's look at verses 11 through 19. Who will read 11 through 19? Judges 2, 11 and 19. Philip?
Then the children of Israel did evil in the sight of the Lord, and served Baals. And they forsook the Lord God of their fathers, who had brought them out of the land of Egypt. And they followed other gods from among the gods of the people who were all around them. And they bowed down to them, and they provoked the Lord to anger. They forsook the Lord and served Baal and Ashtoreths. And the anger of the Lord was hot against Israel. So he delivered them into the hands of plunderers who despoiled them. And he sold them into the hands of their enemies all around, so that they could no longer stand before their enemies. Wherever they went out, the hand of the Lord was against them for calamity, as the Lord had said, and as the Lord had sworn to them. And they were greatly distressed. Nevertheless, the Lord raised up judges who delivered them out of the hand of those who plundered them. Yet they would not listen to their judges, but they played the harlot with other gods, and bowed down to them. They turned quickly from the way in which their fathers walked, in obeying the commandments of the Lord. They did not do so. And when the Lord raised up judges for them, the Lord was with the judge and delivered them out of the hand of their enemies all the days of the judge. The Lord was moved to pity by their groaning because of those who oppressed them and harassed them. And it came to pass, when the judge was dead, that they reverted and behaved more corruptly than their fathers, by following other gods to serve them and bow down to them. They did not cease from their own doings, nor from their stubborn way.
All right. So, how do we describe what he's writing about here? There's a particular word or whatnot we talk about with this. What are they doing here? How does he describe them? They're faithful, then what happens, Mike?
Become rebellious.
Become rebellious, and then what happens?
Consequences never go first.
Then their enemies oppress them as a consequence, and then what happens?
Cry out to the Lord.
Cry out to the Lord, and then what happens?
It's a judge. It's a cycle.
Yeah, it's just a cycle. It just keeps going and going and going. And you see that in here. One of the things, of course, that we're going to notice here is there is a theme throughout the book, of course, of apostasy, of people turning away from God into these worldly ways. There's oppression, there's deliverance and all of that. And there's also disunity. Because of the sin that entered in among them, remember in Joshua's day, they were a united people. They were together. And even at the end of the book of Joshua, as we studied, even when there was a misunderstanding, they talked that out, they worked that out, they were united in their beliefs, their convictions, and all of that. But in this book, when they start to turn to idolatry, they become very much divided among themselves and begin sometimes to fight against each other. And so that's one of the great lessons you can learn out of this, is when sin enters into a community of people or to a group of people, they'll end up turning on each other. Mike.
I would say that because of different Baals, different Asherah, they were all kind of divided amongst that. But the real main reason was because they were against God. And we see that in the church today. So this, that, the other. But the real reason is because God's not being followed.
Right, exactly. When you leave the way of truth, there are many paths of error, and those many paths of error end up being in conflict with each other. But the root of it, like you say, is because they've left the Lord. They left His truth. So you see this summary of the cycles going on there. And in the workbook on page 27, there's the question box down there. It says, why did God allow His people to be oppressed by foreign nations? And it said, be ready to provide scriptures to support your answer. So we've really got the answer here right before us in verses 20 to 23. So somebody want to summarize that? We'll read this. Why did He allow it? All right, let's read 20 to 23. Who's got that? Caesar, you got it?
Then the angel of the Lord was hot against Israel, and he said, because this nation has transgressed my covenant, which I commanded their fathers, and has not heeded my voice, I also will no longer drive out before them any of the nations which Joshua left when he died, so that through them I might test Israel whether they will keep the way of the Lord to walk in them as their fathers kept them or not. Therefore, the Lord left those nations without driving them out immediately, nor did He deliver them into the hands of Joshua.
Okay, why did He allow this to happen? Transgressions? And Mike?
He left them there after Joshua had died, so that those people could learn their faithfulness. The nation can learn their faithfulness. I think there's also another place where it says so they throw war.
Okay, so how does leaving these people there in this oppression help them learn to be faithful? A test for them. How is it a test?
Are they going to look at these other gods and these other nations that seem to be their conquerors? Or are they going to trust God? Are they going to turn? Which way are they going to turn? And so He left them there so that they would learn reliance upon Him, even in the darkest of times. God is still there, and His promises are going to come about.
Right. I mean, you go all the way back to the garden, And God has always given man a choice. Are you going to serve me or you're not going to serve me? You're going to obey, you're not going to obey. There it was the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Here is these nations that surround them that are idolatrous people. And as they attack and oppress Israel, that gives Israel the opportunity to either exercise faith or not exercise faith. So God tested them with these nations by leaving them in that land. Any other thoughts? All right, quiz time. Let's go through some of these. Question number 1 on page 25. Who was the first judge? Othniel. Exactly right. What's special about Othniel? Anything? Yeah, Caleb's nephew. You think about one of the great heroes of faith among the Israelites from the time of the Exodus to the time that they go into the land of Canaan. Caleb is that. Even though there's not a whole lot written about him, he stands out, of course, along with Joshua as a great man of faith. So his nephew, Othniel, was the first judge. Who was the only female judge? Deborah, of course. That's a give me, right? Why do you think God chose Deborah to be a judge in Israel? That's question number, page 27, bottom of page 27. I want to throw that in with Deborah. So bottom of page 27, if you have an answer written in there, why do you think he chose Deborah? If there's only one female judge out of all of them, why did he do that? Because there's the principle throughout the Old Testament and New Testament, male leadership. Why would he have Deborah there? Mike?
Couple of different reasons. First of all, there was a lack of male leadership, of true male leadership. And secondly, because Deborah showed great faith in God and her willingness just to state the facts of it.
Okay, yeah. There's this failure of male leadership at the time because Barak comes to her, and, I'm not going to war unless you go out with me. Well, in any culture, even today, that is unmanly. If a man's not willing to go out to the fight, that he needs a woman to go out there with him, that's just not good. So it's a rebuke to that failed leadership among the Israelites. She had a place to serve, and she's a great woman of faith. No question about that. And those women are definitely needed among God's people to encourage men and to counsel them in things. But if he's unwilling to go out, that's an issue. So there's a rebuke in this, and Deborah being a great woman of faith. And remember that the glory in the battle went to a woman, to another woman, by the way. But it's a big rebuke to the people of the time and their failure to honor God. All right, question number 3. Who was the last judge of Israel? Samuel. Sometimes we don't think of Samuel as a judge, but he was a judge. And he's one of the unique ones. When you look through the book, he's a unique one because he served as priest as well. So, and really, we read about him in 1 Samuel, of course, outside of the book of Judges, but Samuel was the last judge. Now then, this judge plunged a dagger so deep into the belly of the fat king Eglon that he could not withdraw it. So that's question number 5. Who is that judge that stuck the dagger in the fat man? Ehud. Okay. Quite a fascinating story that is written there in Judges chapter 3 about him doing that. Anyways, kids like it a lot. Some of us older ones like it too. This judge killed 600 Philistines with an ox goad. Question number 6. Who is that? Shamgar. What's unique about Shamgar other than killing 600 Philistines with an ox goad? Do what?
That's all we know about.
That's all we know about him, really. Just he's there in one verse and boom. That's it. So, no doubt a great man of war. And that, by the way, when you look at these judges, sometimes in our mind, we get judge and we think of, somebody in a black robe and analyzing the law in a case that's presented to them. That's not really what they did for the most part. There's a little bit of that here and there, but their main job was to be military leaders and to overthrow the oppressors. So Shamgar fits that very well. Now, name 2 judges who were also prophets. Who is it? Oh, Deborah and Samuel. I already had that up there. Yeah, Deborah and Samuel. So that's easy enough. All right. This judge was known for his great physical strength. Samson, right. So Samson goes down in history. People who have almost no clue about the Bible know about Samson. Sort of like they know about Goliath and some things like that, but they know about Samson. Now, this judge did not restrain his sons who were very wicked. Yeah, Eli. And we read about that 1 Samuel chapter 3 in the great rebuke, and his sons end up being killed when they go out to battle. And when they do that, remember, they lose the ark, and we'll get to all that later, and Eli falls over and breaks his neck. All right, now let's look at the Judges timeline. I believe this is page 26 in the workbook, if you want to see a little bit closer in there. But what do you notice about this timeline that's given here? Anything just kind of jump out at you, Mike?
As time goes on, I have one more judge and start coming closer and closer together as well.
And why is that?
Because as time goes on, it becomes more control.
Yeah, they have more and more issues, and they need more and more judges, Mike.
I would also say that God's patience with him became greater and greater as well by this trial.
Yep, and he's working hard to try to help his people. And it also helps us to understand when we're talking about the judges, it's not one person over all of Israel, dealing with all of Israel, from Dan to Beersheba, so to speak. It's almost always a localized or regional event that's taking place in the oppression. They're dealing with that. And so some of these judges and some of these incidents, they overlap or they're back to back. They may even be simultaneous things. We don't know all the specific time frames on it. So it's a local or regional judge for a particular people and oppression that's taking place. All right, then. The area of the judges, this is page 27, the area in which they judged or delivered, act as a deliverer. You can see that. You can analyze that. I know it's pretty small up on the screen up here. It's just the kind of the nature of looking at this and trying to cram all that information on one thing. But let's step through some of these here. Judges chapter 3. Judges 3, Othniel in verses 7 through 11, to get a little more detail on him. He's that first judge, and when you read about him, one of the things you notice is that he really is a faithful man of God. Later judges you read about, they have questionable decisions, questionable actions, or just very flat out, they're just sinful. They have sin in their life. They have big flaws in their life. Think of Gideon, the ephod, Jephthah and his daughter, Samson. Go ahead.
It'd be interesting to kind of look at that screen we were before and kind of see those judges, like the ones like Samson and stuff like that are more evil. They're more on the line of following society, and you can kind of see the judges get worse as the side of society goes away.
Yes, exactly right. It absolutely tracks together. Cruz.
As the judges get worse, the oppression becomes more prevalent, right? You see the red box down below. So,
Yep.
Whereas on the front end, you see the oppression only really happening for the most part when there isn't a judge.
Right. It talks about these periods of rest. And then later on, it just seems like there's just one thing after another going on. Lots of turmoil in that society in the land of Canaan overall, as the Israelites are unfaithful, disunified, and being oppressed and influenced by the society around them. So as we look at this, Othniel, a pretty good man, you get to Ehud, and one of the things you read about Ehud in chapter 3, verse 19, remember, as he went down to see the king of Eglon, and he's headed away, it says that he turns around in verse 19 at Gilgal. So if you do, I don't think, no, I didn't get this on there. Gilgal is there at kind of the border of Ephraim and Benjamin, just west of the river Jordan. So he's down in that area. So he's gone down south. He's come back up. He's going to turn around and head back and go attack Eglon, the king of Eglon. All right, so they're being oppressed by Moab, Ammon, and Amalek at this time, descendants of Lot, and then the Amalekites, the ones who had attacked Israel when they were in the desert. So these are people they've had trouble with before, but here he goes down, he kills them, he turns around there at Gilgal. So it's just kind of in that southeast area, east of the Jordan, is where he's dealing with things. Now let's jump forward a little bit, and I know this is a high-level overview here. He ends up going back to the mountains of Ephraim, by the way. But then Shamgar, where does it say, verse 31, that Shamgar, who is he dealing with? Okay, the Philistines. Where are the Philistines? You can probably see it on this chart up here.
The shoreline of the Mediterranean Sea there at Gaza, up to Ashkelon and Ashdod.
Yeah, they're kind of in that western territory of Judah there. So that's where he's dealing with his things. That's where he's acting as deliverer and judge. And by the way, him killing the 600 Philistines with an ox goad, that's not necessarily in one battle. It could be, but it's not necessarily so. But he was known, obviously, as a great warrior there. All right, so jumping forward to Deborah, chapter 4, verse 2. Chapter 4, verse 2. Who will read that for us? Go ahead.
So the Lord sold them into the hand of Jabin, king of Canaan, who reigned in Hazor. The commander of his army was Sisera, who dwelt in Harosheth Hagoyim.
Okay. All right, so this Hazor there is in that area of Naphtali. So it's kind of north. Remember that in the book of Joshua, it makes particular note of how they went as a entire army and razed Hazor, burned it to the ground. Here it's talking about they're up in Hazor. So this is where trouble is happening. And they go down to get Deborah and talk to her at Ramah Bethel, and that's in the area of Ephraim. That's not the one I wanted. But anyways, that's in the area of Ephraim there. Any other thoughts before we press on to Gideon? He's a little more interesting. So Gideon, in Judges chapter 6 through 8, talks about Gideon and everything that unfolded with him. What do we know about Gideon? Who's got a summary of his account?
His faith continues to kind of grow throughout the story. You know, it's not really that much at first. You know, there's a lot of, should I be doing this? Are you still with me, God? And so he needed a lot of signs for his faith to grow and continue to grow with God.
Yeah, because remember initially when he goes to destroy the altar, he does that at night. He's concerned about things, but he does go and he destroys that altar. Let's notice Judges chapter 6, verse 33. 33. And let's just read 33 to 35 there. Who's got that for us? Go ahead, Josh.
And all the Midianites and Amalekites, people of the east, gathered together, and they crossed over and camped in the valley of Jezreel. But the Spirit of the Lord came upon Gideon, and he blew the trumpet, and the Israelites scattered behind him. He sent messengers throughout all of Manasseh, who also gathered behind him. He also sent messengers to Asher, Zebulun, and Naphtali, and they came up to meet him.
Okay, first of all, Midianites and Amalekites, where are they? Midianites and Amalekites. Do you see them on that chart there? Yeah, they're down south. Now, they go to the valley of Jezreel, which is all the way up there in Naphtali. So we'll fast forward, or Zebulun rather. So you see Zebulun here on this chart. You see Mount Carmel there that juts out into the Mediterranean Sea. And then this has it labeled as Plain of Jezreel, but you see the river there. It's also described as a valley there. And this is the modern picture of it. So Mount Carmel's kind of up there on the top of the map. And then that fertile area just south of that, or below that, it's really kind of southeast of the mountain. But that's the valley of Jezreel. So they traveled a pretty good distance from south of really the land of Canaan up into more the north central or even northern area of the land of Canaan. And who is it that he sends messengers to? What do we have there in verse 35? Okay. Asher, Naphtali, Zebulun, throughout that territory. But you can see he's calling people around that territory. Come in here and help us. He's getting people who are nearby to come in and help them out. All right, so Gideon, he's facing this great Midianite army. And what's the famous thing he does to see whether or not the Lord will deliver them into his hands?
And again, the way that the NASB reads is, Gideon said to God, if you will deliver Israel through me, as you have spoken, then do this. So he doesn't really trust God's word just being spoken. He wants a sign, wants something that is more concrete, something that he can know.
Okay. All right. He has this lack of trust in God, and he needs one sign, and he needs another sign. Well, I really want to be sure. Then he has to go down into the camp and hear the people talking about, the dream, and we're going to be defeated. It's Gideon. But he gains enough faith and trust to where they go from 32,000 to 300 men to launch this attack at night. So he does gain that faith. But in Judges chapter 9, notice verses 22 down to 28, and you probably have a little header there, talks about that he makes an ephod. So the people come to him and make a request after this great victory over the Midianites. Well, we want you and your sons to rule over us. No, I'm not going to do that. And he ends up making an ephod. In verse 24, he requests the plunder from them, the earrings and all of that. And so he gets that, and he makes this ephod, and it was a snare. Verse 27, Gideon made it into an ephod, set it up in his city, Ophrah. And all Israel played the harlot with it there. It became a snare to Gideon and to his house. Well, what about that? Why is that surprising? Or maybe actually what we're getting ready to look at is surprising.
It's ironic that his story was kicked off by destroying his father's altar and fighting idolatry. But his story, he did a lot of good in between, but, as fame was attained, riches were attained, the story goes by him creating an altar. And go back to sort of what? Promoting idolatry.
Let's go to Hebrews 11. Yeah, you would think he would continue after that victory and everything he'd experienced, to be faithful to God. But as Cruz is saying, he just does an about face essentially and starts going back. But sometimes when we read an account in Judges, that's not the end of the story. And we only find out about it from the New Testament. If all we had was the Old Testament, we would finish up with Gideon and be like, well, the guy just fell away. But Hebrews chapter 11 and verse 32. Who will read that for us? Hebrews 11:32. Because this catches several guys. Go ahead, John.
And what more shall I say? Time would fail me to tell of Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah, of David, and Samuel the prophets.
Okay, so it mentions Gideon here, and let's just remind ourselves what's Hebrews 11 about. Okay, people of faith. And who's included in this list? Besides the one which we just read. Where does it start out? Verse 4. Who's there? Abel. Is there any question about Abel and his faithfulness? None whatsoever. Right? The only thing we have about him is he did what God wanted him to do. God was pleased. God accepted his sacrifice. Then his brother murders him. So he's faithful, right? You go down and you read about Noah. Yeah, there's some questionable things in Noah's life, but Noah's here. He's a great man of faith. Abraham. Is there any question about Abraham's condition after he dies? Any question whatsoever as to whether he's headed to heaven or to hell? There's no question about Abraham, right? He's headed to heaven. Because those who die and are faithful, they end up in Abraham's bosom. So we know that he is going to dwell in all eternity with the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. You just keep on going down through here and reading about, you got Moses, and it keeps on going. And so when you get down to this part in Hebrews 11:32, it says Gideon and Barak and Samson and Jephthah, David and Samuel. Is there any question about David? No. So you see that they are included in this list of people who are faithful, people who the Holy Spirit is putting forth as examples to us. And Gideon is one here, and I would put him at the first of several in the book of Judges that you read about him, and then there's this big black mark in his life that Hebrews tells us. What would we understand from Hebrews relative to their life overall?
God is able to take very flawed people and still make them according to his plan, like his plan. But also, he looks at faithfulness on probably a lot differently than most people. The fact that we think that the person has to live in perfection. That's not what God looks for. And he looks at the character of the person, he looks at the action of the person, the reason that the actions happen. He takes all of that into account. And he writes it here in Hebrews 11 for us to be able to see that. And he looks at it more overall picture.
Yeah, and that's not to say that God just overlooks sin, or that God says, okay, you've done 5 good deeds and 2 bad deeds, and so your good outweighs the bad. That's not the idea. The idea is, as Mike is saying, God looks at a person in their overall life. We have to understand at some point here that Gideon turned things around in his life. Just like the end of Samson's story. He turns things around in his life. Abraham, he had the issues with lying about his wife and things like that. Well, he turned that around in his life. David and all his issues, he turned that around in his life. And so you see there's more to the story, but as Mike is saying, God can take people who are flawed and do great things with them, and they can exercise faith in Him, and they can overcome those weaknesses, those sins, that unrighteousness in their life, and do the will of God, and in the end, be found in His favor. Mike?
God just needs people.
Right. And even those who he will patiently lead step by step, as he did with Gideon. Okay, the fleece is wet. Okay, the fleece is dry. Oh, okay, you need a little more information. You need a little more encouragement here. And so he worked with him through that. Gideon's a great account of that. Now, just got to move on. Does somebody have something else? Go ahead.
To that point, Stephen, I was just going to say they had a working, obedient faith with perseverance, and that continued to either death or, having their life taken.
Right. There was a perseverance here. That's exactly right. So we get to the most, I don't know, I want to use the word complex. I don't think that's the right word. Jephthah. And you know anything about Jephthah, and you understand he was mentioned in Hebrews 11:32, and that makes us pause, because after his great victory on his way back, remember that he vowed to sacrifice whatever first came out of his house, and he gets there and his daughter's the one who comes out. And there's a big debate, we're not going to get into it, about, some people say he sacrificed his daughter, some people say no, he actually redeemed her and she was just dedicated virgin. That's very weak in evidence in the Old Testament. The evidence leans to the fact that he actually sacrificed her. And if you want to talk about that more later, we'll do that. But having said that, there is another man there that you look at and you go, well, how could he be in that Hall of Fame of faith? Well, again, we can do some horrific and shocking things in our life, and still God will be patient and forgive us, and we can turn to Him and live righteously before Him. That is what jumps out about Jephthah. And then, of course, Samson and all of his flaws. When you get to Samson, and a couple of just geographical references, this is history and geography. In Judges chapter 14, verse 1, Samson went down to Timnah, saw a woman in Timnah, the daughters of the Philistines. And that Timnah, I don't know if you can see it, if you find Judah on this map, and basically go straight up from the A in Judah. Timnah is on the border there between Judah, or close to the border of Judah and the territory of Dan, the southern territory of Dan there. So that's the area, and he's dealing with the Philistines. So when judges are dealing with the Philistines, they're more than likely down in the area of Judah, and that's where they're operating. All right, so the next one then, in Judges chapter 17, we get to this Micah. This Micah, who is in the area or the mountains of Ephraim at the time. And then from the mountains of Ephraim, who is it that comes and gets him? He becomes a priest for a man, but then what happens? Just somebody briefly hit that story. Remember, the Danites are traveling from the south, going to the north to find more territory and a new place to settle. They come through and they convince Micah, instead of being a priest to one man and his family, why don't you be a priest to the tribe? And they take him up north and they settle, and that's where the city of Dan is established in that story of Micah and the idolatry that he's involved in there. All right, then chapter 19 and verse 1 talks about the Levite and his concubine. The Levite is again from Ephraim, and his concubine is down in Bethlehem of Judah. And then it talks about them going back through the area of Benjamin, and that's where the wickedness unfolds. And everything happens in that story. I'm not going to cover all of that. We're going to wait on Eli and Samuel. Jump with me to Ruth. I want to cover this just in the few minutes we have left. So the Levite, the concubine, the immorality, the what's the word for what he did with his concubine? Savagery that really is involved in that. You've got all that going on, and it's just absolutely awful about what we read about there. But in that relative same time period, you've got Ruth. And what's the account of Ruth? What happens with her? What kind of woman is she? Go ahead.
Married to a family. Her husband dies. All of it basically died. So it's left with her and her mother-in-law.
Okay. So Ruth is, let's read Ruth 1, 1 and 2. 1 and 2. Who's got that? Go ahead, Carter.
That came to pass in the days when the judges ruled that there was a famine in the land, and a certain man of Bethlehem, Judah, went to dwell in the country of Moab, he and his wife and his 2 sons. The name of the man was Elimelech, the name of his wife was Naomi, and the name of his 2 sons were Mahlon and Chilion, Ephrathites of Bethlehem, Judah, and they went to the country of Moab and remained there.
Okay, so they're Ephraimites. They've migrated at some point down to Bethlehem, Judah. That's Bethlehem in Judah. That's outside of Jerusalem. And then because of the famine, they go over to that area of Moab. So they go east of the Dead Sea. And chapter 1, verse 22, it tells us that Ruth, of course, is a Moabitess. She ends up marrying. She ends up losing her husband. That is Naomi's son. Naomi's her mother-in-law. The famine is over. They end up going back to Bethlehem of Judah. And this is where it unfolds that you read about her and Boaz, and they end up getting married. But Boaz is a man of God. He respects God. He respects Ruth. Ruth is known as a believer in Jehovah. And so they end up marrying. And what in Bible history jumps out about Ruth? 2 things in particular, but a Moabitess. Mike? Okay. David is her descendant, and then, of course, Christ is her descendant. What lesson can we get out of this? So Ruth overall, John?
We see that contrast that you mentioned earlier about people being presented with a test from God. And you have this list of faithful people. Well, what do you accomplish with those tests? Well, here you see in the book of Ruth an example of what it means to be a true man of God, what it means to be a true woman of God, and that there's a faithful remnant of God's people. And even though it might be very, very small, it's very important because, as Mike said, the lineage of Christ comes out of this relationship. If you have a faithful man and you have a faithful woman, and they're presented with tests, and it looks all hope is lost, they remain faithful to God, and things come through in the end in a good way. God will provide if you persevere through those tests and remain faithful.
Right. As Judges 21:25 says, during that time period, everyone was doing what was right in their own eyes, and that's the general culture, but there are exceptions. And in our culture, it's safe to say people are doing what's right in their own eyes. But that doesn't mean we have to go down that same path. We can be like a Boaz and a Ruth and live faithfully for the Lord in spite of all the corruption, evil, and wickedness around us. We can live faithfully for Him and help to pass on the faith to that next generation. All right, Lord willing, we'll move on to the time of the United Kingdom